Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm reviewing Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This was directed by Andre Ovell and stars a variety of newcomers. The film is set in 1968 and takes place in a small town. It focuses on three young teenage friends, Stella, Augie and Chuck. They've lived in the town most of their lives and they're the only friends they really have. One Halloween night, they ultimately work out a plan to pay back the bully of the school. In quite an interesting and fun way. Ultimately, they run into Ramon, a young drifter who's just passing through town, who's decided to go to the drive-in. They ultimately hiding his car as the bullies chase them down, and he ultimately protects them. They go to a particular haunted house, a house that has a lot of stories about a young girl named Sarah Billings, who ultimately died in the house, and she tells ghost stories. Upon finding the secret room, they come upon a journal of stories that she had written, horror stories. Ultimately, Stella, the young girl of the group, takes the book home. And as she does, this is when strange things start to happen. The stories begin to write themselves within the book. Each story revolves around the people who are in the house at the time that she ultimately takes the book. One by one, their greatest fears come to life and ultimately take them and they disappear. For those who are left, it becomes a race against time to work out what's going on and how to stop what's happening. This film was based upon a book by the same name, written by Alvin Shwarts. And it sort of was adapted and created by Guillermo Del Toro. He sort of crafted the story and the ideas and worked a bit on the screenplay with the other writers. And that's what the draw was for me to this film, is Guillermo Del Toro. The fact he was involved in this, and that's sort of what made this very interesting for me. I didn't really know a lot about this film. I'd seen a trailer, bits and pieces of a trailer, but I hadn't really known what the film was going to be like. Ultimately, I went to see it because, one, he was involved, and two, it was sort of horror, and I like horror films that are done differently. And I thought this could have been quite interesting. But this film really wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It's not a traditional horror film. It's not filled with like gory or violent moments or what you traditionally feel will come from a horror film. It's something completely different. Even though it was different to what I expected it to be, I still enjoyed certain aspects of the film. This film ultimately had a lot more supernatural elements to it than I expected. It's sort of a cross between Goosebumps, It, Stephen King's It, and a splash of Supernatural, the TV series. And that's sort of what it is. It's more of a ghost story and more of supernatural elements to it than I expected. And that sort of threw me a little bit to begin with, but once I sort of understood what the film was doing and what it was trying to tell me, I ultimately went on the journey with it. And it took me a little while to get into the film. That was partly due to the fact that it wasn't quite the film I expected and I didn't feel a connection with the characters to begin with. It wasn't until Stella got the book that the film became kind of interesting. And also to the fact that I had 4 teenage girls sitting behind me while I was trying to watch this film. They would not be quiet. It was quite a bit of a pain in the ass, to tell you the truth. But I got through the film. What surprised me about it is it felt more aimed at teenage kids than anything. It didn't really feel like it was an adult horror film or a horror film focused on adults. It was sort of trying that kid market, but it had a really odd tone. A lot of it felt like Goosebumps, but it also felt like It, minus the clown obviously, but it's just their fears that come true. In It, it's like Pennywise creates their fears and that's what haunts them. In this one, it's sort of stories that these people have heard or horror stories that they heard as kids that scared them. And that's sort of what it sort of looks like, and it sort of feels like that. It's a very sort of strange film in that regard. I think all the acting's solid by the young newcomers. I think they all do a solid job. You know, this sort of, the actors I sort of knew in it were Gil Bellows and Dean Norris, and Dean plays the father of Stella, and Gil plays the sheriff of the town. But everybody else was kind of new and fresh to this sort of story that I hadn't seen before. But I liked the performances that they gave. Like I said, there's things I liked and things I didn't quite like as much. So I'll start with the positives. The main draw to this film, even though it's kind of interestingly done and engaging, and I kind of liked elements of it, and I liked there were sort of urban legends and ghost stories and bits and pieces that were talking I really liked. The real draw to this film was Guillermo Del Toro's involvement was one, and the other was the horror elements, the creature designs, the creatures that we see through the film. The death scene, so to speak, I really liked this aspect of the film. This is what became really interesting. It was done in a unique and interesting way, and it drew me in, and I was really impressed with it. I had a smile on my face through a lot of these scenes, and this was sort of the draw for me in many ways. I like the look and design of the world. I like how it was sort of dark in parts and light in others. I like how, in a way, towards the end of the film, the house becomes alive like it was, and I liked that. There was many aspects to this. I liked the idea of the book, that it was writing its own stories. I liked the kids trying to work out what's going on and how to stop it. And I liked the fact it was set in 1968. There was no mobile phones, there was no computers. The kids were trying to do what they do research-wise, so they had to go to archives and libraries and the hospital and stuff like that. And I really liked all of those elements. And the creature design, like I said, was fantastic. There's one with this really sort of obese sort of creature with a big round long face that ultimately attacks one of the kids, Chucky, in this red sort of room. I really liked that. I liked Ramon when he's sort of getting attacked by this particular fear he had of this creature that can separate itself and bring itself back together. It was really great. I really liked the look of that. Also, like this creepy zombie creature and a scarecrow, and I really liked all of those sort of elements to it. I think those designs were great, and that was really fascinating to watch. But that's sort of the main things I really loved about it. Now the things I didn't quite like as much. Like I said, the first 15-20 minutes, I didn't really get into the story. I didn't really care. We have a bit of a voiceover of Stella telling about stories and stuff like that. Then we're thrown into the world. We don't have a real chance to connect with any of the characters, and then they're thrown into them going trick-or-treating, and I didn't really connect with them, didn't know what was going on. It wasn't until they arrived at the house and ultimately found this particular book, and Stella takes the book from the house. This is when the film became much more interesting to me. But before that, I didn't really care or feel connected. And like I said, I was disturbed by a group of girls sitting behind me. But yeah, I just didn't feel a real connection with anything or anyone. The other thing I would say is this film really, rather than showing things, it just has characters doing exposition and explaining things or telling stories or histories of characters. And I just felt that I would have rather have seen it. The only character really has a lot of depth is Stella, and we find out that her mother just left, but we find that out from her friends telling Ramon, the new guy, as Stella's standing outside of the car. And I just felt that by having them explain it, it just wasn't as interesting. And there's a lot of moments throughout the film where it's the same sort of thing, where they talk about things that happened to them rather than showing them. So it takes away from the interesting parts of the story, and I would rather see. The other thing I would say is it's tone-wise, it didn't quite know what it wanted to be. It didn't know whether it wanted to just be goosebumps and sort of fun and sort of ghoulish characters, or it wanted to be a bit more like It, a bit more scary and frightening and full-on, but it sort of sits in the middle of both of them. And it leans much more towards Goosebumps than it does to It. Yeah, it trying to find its tone sort of, I felt a bit lost as it was trying to find its way as well. And I'm not going to spoil anything, I didn't like the ending. They ended in such a way that sort of, I don't want to give it away, but they ended in such a way that I just feel we've seen 100 times, and they could have done some other things that were much more interesting, and they could have ended them earlier or done something a bit different. And it really feels like they're trying to set up for a sequel, and I just found that a bit disappointing. Final thoughts. I found this film, it's about these kids coming to terms with their fears and trying to move forward, trying to let go of the past. Like Stella's character is kind of interesting. She's this writer. Her mother has left her and her father. She looks after her father. And Ramon says to her, why don't you, if you want to be a writer, you have to leave the town. She said, I can't leave my father. So it's like she feels responsible for him. She feels she has to look after him because of her mother leaving the town. And all the other characters sort of feel like that as well. It also looks at the difficulties of being a teenager. I'm going to give Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark 3.5 out of 5. I thought it was a solid and above average horror film. I thought there were some great elements to it, and I did enjoy my experience with it. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.